Regards, I'm an assistant in business process management class, and here I want to explain about how to use PM table. But before that, I want to explain what PM table is. PM table is an internal database that is provided by process maker itself, so that we don't have to use an external database to obtain data that we want to input in process maker, such as a Dynaform. So we don't have to use phpMyAdmin or PostgreSQL to use a database. On a side note, we could actually connect Process Maker to an external database, but Process Maker has already provided one, so that if you don't understand how to use an external database, you could still use the database provided by the Process Maker. Okay, so now I'm going to explain how to use it. Here, for example, in the Dynaform that we've made, there are two fields that still haven't been filled with anything, which are invoice type and invoice subtype. We can see that there still isn't any dropdown here. PM table can be used to populate data to these two fields so that when we click it, options will appear. Okay, so now let's go head straight to how to make it. So first we click admin and then we go to PM tables. After we click admin, we go to PM tables. To create a new table, click new. After that, click new PM table. First, I want to make a table for invoice type. To add an attribute, we click add field. Then we fill it in. So what this null column does is to tell the process maker whether the data for ID can be made empty or not. And then for the primary key, this is to tell that this attribute is the primary key for the table. And for auto increment, this is to tell that this attribute is going to be auto incremented or not. If we're done, click update. I think I misclicked on this one, so I'm going to remove it. And then we create another field for its descriptions. If finished, we click update. If we're finished with all the attributes, we click create. Now that we're finished with the table for invoice type, we're going to fill the table with data. Here, pick the table that we want to fill with data, which is inv underscore type, and then we click data. To fill the table, we click add row. And then we fill it according to the model. First, I want to make two data. The first is goods, and the second is surfaces. After filling it, we close it. Now I'm going to make the second table, which is invoice subtype, as is written in the module. This table is similar to the previous table, but the difference is here I add an attribute that explains in which invoice type this invoice subtype data is. I'll explain it to you later what it is for. After that, we click update and then we click create. And then, like the previous table, we populate the table according to the module. Here for the first data, the invoice type ID is 1. And the description is foods. And then I'm adding clothing. And its invoice type ID is also 1. For the third data, I add personal electronics. Its invoice type ID is also 1. Then I add consulting. Its invoice type ID is 2, which is services. We do the same for the fifth data and the sixth data, which is healthcare and transport. And then we close the window. After that, we're going to use the data that we filled before. We open the process. Then we edit our Dynaform. The way so that they are filled with what we've made in PM table is that first we click on this field and then we go to SQL and click the three dots next to it. Here we filled with SQL queries, to pick which data that we want to use. For the fill invoice type, I use the data from inv_type table. If we want to use a table in the PM table with SQL query, we have to add the prefix pmt underscore on inv_type, so it's detected by the process maker. And then we click save. After that, we edit query in invoice subtype. And then we click Save. Now let's preview it to see if it works or not. Here we can see the options appear. For the invoice type, appear goods and services. And for invoice subtypes, appear foods, clothing, personal electronics, etc. But there's a problem. When we pick goods for invoice type, all invoice subtypes will appear, including the ones for services invoice type. We also see that it also happens for services. So to make the subtypes appear accordingly, we go back to edit the Dynaform. And then we click the invoice subtype field and we click its SQL query. Here we add where space type underscore ID equals to add invoice type. So what this code does is, especially where type underscore ID equals to add invoice type part, here we've taken the ID and description data from PMT underscore INV underscore subtype. The data that we've taken is then filtered based on type underscore ID equals to add invoice type that we wrote before. So here we are filtering whether the type underscore ID corresponds to add invoice type. So what add invoice type is, I'm gonna close the window first. Add invoice type is a variable from the invoice type field. And so the invoice subtype field dropdown will change according to what is chosen in invoice type. We'll see it in action in a moment. Here, if we pick goods, the options that appear will correspond to the invoice type. And so will it be when we pick services or on invoice type. And so that is one example on how PM table can be used. For the next part, I'm going to explain how to export and import Dynaforms. Okay, so previously we've made a Dynaform for receive invoice, where an employee can fill some data on a Dynaform. Now we're going to create another Dynaform where a supervisor is going to make an approval to the invoice the employee made. So first of all, to export the Dynaform, click the up button here. You can see, click the up button here. The form will be downloaded as a .json file. Then we save the file. Now I'm going to make a new Dynaform based on the Dynaform that we previously made. First, we click create. We name our form approve report form. We name it approve report form. Okay, after that, we click save and open. After that, we import the file that we have exported. Because we are going to create an approval form, we're adding another field for approval in the form. We add an H2 subtitle first. We name it response. And after that, I'm adding a drop down. For the variable, pick invoice approves. And I'm going to name the field as approve invoice. After that, because we simply want to approve and not edit any data that has been inputted, first we must change the display mode for approve invoice field to edit. Then we click the gray box, this gray box outside here. Then we change the display mode to disabled. The reason why we do that is because this gray box refers to the whole Dynaform, and as I've set this to disabled, this means the data on this form cannot be edited by the supervisor. So the supervisor can only change the approved invoice field because we've set the display mode to edit specifically. Okay, so now let's preview it. So it will be like this. We can't change anything besides this approve invoice fields where we can pick yes or no. Okay, so for PM tables in Dynaform, I'm going to end it here. The next video will be continued by my other friends. Thank you, and sorry if I've said something wrong. Thank you very much.